Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Masterclass Theatre. My name's Dave Guest. I'm introducing you to this session. I've been introducing all the sessions throughout the day, and we had some really good discussions going on and more to come throughout the day, I'm sure. Well, the last 5 years have seen enormous change for bus and coach operators on the accessibility front, with much more to come in the near future. Many operators have embraced the opportunity that change can bring, while others may well be missing the chance to grow their businesses and change lives in the process. This session won't only review what operators are required to do, but will go beyond the regulations and explore what can be done to attract new users and make buses and coaches happier modes of transport. Well, in the driving seat for this session is going to be Keith McNally. He's Operations Director with CPT. He's going to say a few words to you, and then he's going to be introducing you to a panel of experts, and then we'll open the floor up for questions. But first of all, please welcome Keith McNally.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see so many here. I thought I'd just give some context before we get into the panel discussion to just consider how we've got to where we are with the various regulations on accessibility. So first off, we've got PSVAR introduced in the early 2000s, really transformed the bus industry, sets dates for accessibility on new vehicles and then end dates by which all vehicles that were used on local and scheduled services needed to be compliant with the regulations. I think a really good approach to how you transform a fleet. One of the challenges that we saw around 2019 was that there was confusion around the definition of scheduled services, and there were lots of services on home to school and rail replacement that were actually covered by the legislation, but nobody had really realized. And we worked with the Department for Transport to try and come up with some pragmatic solutions to that. We had a series of short-term exemptions, and then through discussion with the department, we got to a point where we have the medium-term exemptions, the MTEs, which we've got for the current period through until 2026. The government issued a call for evidence in 2023, and we're still awaiting the final outcome of that, but we're having discussions about what's going to happen at the end of the MTE period. Just a little bit about the MTEs. A progressive improvement in accessibility for the fleet that should be compliant that wasn't. So there is an opportunity for everyone really who has an accessibility need on closed door and home to school transport to travel in an accessible vehicle, as they should be able to do, but recognizing that there was no way that the fleet was going to be transformed overnight. PSV AIR, then, the Accessible Information Regulations, was something that the government consulted back in 2018 on. And then there was a period where we didn't make that much progress. Then we had COVID, and the regulations were actually made in 2023, so last year, and introduced a series of dates by which services needed to be compliant. So here we are talking about local services. So a different definition, but through discussion with the department, we secured a couple of important exemptions. One for closed door home to school, because it was recognized that there wasn't a need to provide accessible information on services of that nature. And then long distance services. So I think we're all probably, if we're familiar with the industry, we're familiar with the National Express network, where some parts of that network operate as local services, and then coaches travel much longer distances without stopping, so they don't meet the definition of local. And if a service is more not local than it is local, then it's exempt from those regulations. But the first date of real note was the one this year, last month, when vehicles which at that point were 5 years old, or first used on a local service in the last 5 years, needed to be compliant. And then we see older vehicles progressively introduced over the next couple of years with further deadlines. Just a little bit about the requirements, how they vary, and there's a whole series of specific requirements that vary depending on whether a vehicle is partially compliant, which was another concession that we won, making it clear to the government that there was that long period between consultation and implementation of the legislation. And meanwhile, operators had been fitting vehicles in some cases, but they didn't know what the final specification was going to be. So if they were fitting audiovisual information in good faith, but it didn't actually fully comply with the final specification, then that would be allowed under the partial compliance for a number of years. So operators wouldn't need to retrofit with fully compliant equipment until a later date. And then most of the more detailed requirements were required for vehicles first used up until September this year, and then any new vehicles from last month need to also have a screen or present visual information to those who are in a rearward-facing wheelchair space. So that is those. I think that's pretty much it. So what I'm going to do now, we've got an excellent panel of speakers lined up. If I can introduce Adam Rideout, he's the Head of Customer Experience at National Express. If you'd come up, please, Adam. And then we've got Chris Edwards-Thorne, who's the Marketing Manager for Global Transport at Altro. So Altro are one of our supplier members that are a leader in terms of floor coverings, but Chris will tell you a bit more about his wider knowledge of some of the challenges around accessibility. We've got Roland Eglinton, who's the Managing Director at Chalkwell, so a bus and coach operator in Kent. And Barclay Davies, who's the Director for Wales at Bus Users UK. Thank you. So to start off the discussion, I'd just like to talk to each panelist about a particular aspect of accessibility. And we've selected our panel on the basis of expertise in particular areas, expertise and experience. So first I'd like to just go to Adam. National Express was a leader in accessibility, I would say. I was involved in National Express in the early days when we were bringing forward low-floor buses. On the coach side, National Express was a leader in terms of developing the Levanti coach. But I think nevertheless, even as a big operator, National Express has faced some challenges over the last few years. Just like to get a bit of your perspective on that, please, Adam.
Yeah, so we actually introduced our first double-decker low-floor vehicle in 1998. I think there was a bit of a race on to get the first one on the road in the UK, and I think we actually came second, but the first double-decker, so that was good. So yeah, we've been working on this since 1998, and actually over the past sort of 10 years, our our sort of bus design, if you like. We spoke a lot about buses, of course, and it's not just about buses, it's the full end-to-end journey experience for customers. But just sticking with buses for a minute, we've been focusing in since probably 2015 on introducing accessibility measures into our vehicles, very much around the audio-visual and things like that. And then more recently, we've been sort of bringing on board expertise that can help us in the fuller design of the vehicles. So, I like pretty colours and things, but that doesn't matter. So, getting things that have the right contrast ratios and things like that so people are comfortable using our buses is of vital importance. So, as a business, we've been able to lean into this and use it, not as a challenge, but as an opportunity to open up the market, the bus use market to more and more people. I suppose if I was to pick on one of the most challenging aspects is actually adapting the internal processes in our business. So, buying a bus with the kit on is okay. You can do that. You can say you want that floor colour and that pole and that next stop system. But then introducing the maintenance and the processes behind ensuring, and especially now with the regulation changes, ensuring that those things are working all the time. It's not a case that they're just sitting there. They have to be working all the time. They have to be delivering that information, because the one day they're not, we're letting customers down. So I'm very proud of what National Express has done, which is basically designing accessibility in for everyone, and then every customer benefits from that at the end of the day. So,
Great. Okay, thanks, Adam. Altro provide flooring, but I think the reason we got you here today, Chris, is because you've got a greater understanding of some of the challenges that those with neurodiversity challenges face. So can you, Adam there mentioned colouring, and sometimes things look nice, but they don't always work for everyone. So can you tell us a bit about
Yeah,
about
sure.
that,
So we kind of came to the neurodiversity angle because we work with the built environment as well as public transport. And architects and designers are doing lots and lots of work to make public spaces, schools, hospitals, everywhere more accessible to people who are neurodivergent. But we noticed the fact that you can create a safe domestic space for people who have these challenges, and the built environment's making that effort, but public transport is the missing link, is a gap that we need to start thinking about to make this more accessible for passengers. So the population of the UK, about 15 to 20% are neurodivergent, so that could be autism, ADHD, OCD, and then if you bring in people who've got neurodegenerative conditions such as Alzheimer's or dementia, that also presents unique challenges. So when we look at things like colour, lots of people have visual impairments or sensory sensitivity to certain colours and patterns, and it's not something that we as an industry has ever actually considered, and that's not a fault of the industry, it's purely because of the lack of education. We don't know this 80% of people who are disabled have a hidden disability. So while we're brilliant at getting low-level buses and catering people with physical, visual disabilities that we can immediately see and cater those people, we aren't considering people with autism and how that can affect them. And when you look at some of the government statistics of 3 in 10 people with autism being in full-time employment, there's a barrier there which is disproportionate. And we'd like to do everything we can to open bus travel up to everybody, and from an operator perspective, there's a huge amount of people there that you could unlock additional fares of people going on the transport just by making some of these relatively small changes, by considering how patterns and contrasts work for people with specific needs.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And Barclay, Bus Users works with bus users more widely. You're the interface really between users and the bus industry. Can you just tell me a bit about what people have been telling you and the work that you've done around accessibility challenges?
certainly accessibility is a really hot topic. As my colleague here just mentioned, 1 in 5 in the UK are classed as disabled, and 80% of those people have an invisible disability. So there's a huge market out there. The Purple Pound is well worth chasing for operators to grow their business. Bus users, in partnership with Motability, for Catch the Bus Month in September, we launched a report, Why Are We Waiting?, which looked at barriers to transport and accessibility. And there are 5 key themes I'm just going to touch on very briefly. So the first one was independence, and users really value the bus. The bus really is their lifeline to become functioning parts of their communities. One user with muscular dystrophy talked about how the buses are vitally important, enabling him to go out to do shopping, to go to healthcare appointments, and more importantly, go out with his 8-year-old grandson for the day. It gives them the freedom to travel independently. One user with agoraphobia, anxiety and depression said the buses were one of the few places where she interacted with other people, where she felt comfortable enough to do that. And one user had a brain injury following an accident, was enjoying getting to know his local area by travelling on various bus routes, and in the process getting to know drivers' individual names through it. So that's how important buses are to people. The second one is bus stops. We had a lot of comments about bus stops, particularly where there's uneven ground, difficult to access. There's one user, visually impaired, and the access to her bus stop was too dangerous. That my stop doesn't have a seat or a shelter, and is literally a spot. And that does no good to all the great enhancements and work that operators are doing. If you can't get to access the bus, then that's all negated. So we really need to focus on the bus infrastructure. And the inconvenience caused by uneven payments and physical obstacles in the way really prevent people from using the bus, as well as lack of seating at the bus stop. Thirdly, bus design. Great to hear that National Express are engaging with user and disability groups, because that is the only way that you'll get great feedback and have accessible services for all. Wheelchair users in particular talked about the challenges, the layout and design of the designated wheelchair space, where they've got their back towards the driver and facing towards the rear of the bus, meant that they couldn't see the information. Now AIR, when it becomes fully compliant, will address that, but that's an important point to talk about. And automatic ramps were unreliable and problematic, particularly, as I mentioned, on uneven terrain. And users sometimes were stuck mid-motion of the ramp, and they found that quite embarrassing, that people were looking at them, they were the centre of attention. So it really encouraged operators to look at the mechanics of this system, test them regularly, encourage drivers when they walk around checks to make sure they're working properly, etc., etc. And the fourth item is information, and that ranges from very good to poor, non-existent, and even worse, incorrect. Apps help people, but not everyone has access to the apps or the data around them. So there's still a need for printed timetables. And sometimes the AV is not working on services, but AIR should help to improve that. I recently met with Newport Bus, one of the local operators in Wales, what they were doing about AIR. And for common routes, they were making sure that the audio kicked in at the same point on each route, whether on the 1, the 5, or the 7 service, that at the same point the audio would kick in for the next stop announcement, which would help people with autism. And finally, bus drivers, your representatives out in your communities, they have a profound impact on passengers' overall experience. And there are some great examples where they've given assistance, where they've given care, where they've gone out of their way to help passengers. But there are also some negative points as well. Some people talked about the eternal buggy against wheelchair issue, and drivers being hesitant to challenge buggy users in the space. reports of people driving past wheelchair users at bus stops, people asking drivers to let them know where the next stop is and forgetting about it. But of course, AIR will help to improve that as the rollout continues. So there's just a few items that people with disabilities are pointing out to us, the issues that are around the services.
Okay, thank you, Barclay. So earlier on, I outlined some of the legislative requirements, and we've heard an awful lot about the challenges that lots of different people face, and Adam outlined the large operator perspective. I often think there's really good reasons for doing all of this, but we talk to small operators on a daily basis, and I think the challenge for a small operator doing some of this in the timescales that are required is massive. Can you just give us your perspective on that, Roland, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like I get to be the contrarian here slightly, but just to give a bit of background, we're a third-generation family business based in Kent. We've got 55 vehicles. We do bus work, we do coach work, we do special educational needs transport, we do rail replacement. So we're quite diverse. I've actually got children myself with additional needs, and I'm somewhat neurodivergent myself. So I approach this subject from a lot of different angles, as hopefully you can appreciate. But I get very passionate about, the interests of the SME sector here, because it is somewhat different for us, and there are different considerations. If you can imagine a point where you get this legislation with just and noble intentions meeting the practical realities of deliverance, and you can put the SMEs kind of square in that point where we're at where those factors meet. The bigger operators, National Express and plenty of others, are very good at doing what they do, and I think it's fair to say they can look at the bigger picture where, as a local business, we have to take a more nuanced approach, specific to our location and the needs of our customers. And sometimes we have to make difficult decisions there. Like many SMEs, we tend to buy vehicles that are second-hand, mid-life and onwards, whereas the bigger groups will buy new and can specify what they want. And once you get into retrofitting anything, it is really quite difficult. You've got some excellent operators out there using mid and late life vehicles who are facing similar challenges. We want to address these needs. Doing it is somewhat difficult for us. We don't have the same buying power either as, say, an Arriva, a Stagecoach or whoever. If I can share a couple of anecdotes, so when 2004-05, the requirement came in for new buses to be low floor, we thought we would get in there and buy the last of the step entrance buses. That way we didn't have to think about it for a while, and we kind of staved off the inevitable. And what happened was the customer demand shifted. Low floor accessible buses became the expectation of the general public. They were popular with many more people than just wheelchair users, people with push chairs and buggies and all different sorts of disabilities. We hadn't even considered that, so we got that one wrong, and we very quickly had to move on. And the industry is compliant on the bus side, and I think we're better off for it having accessible buses. More recently, we've retrofitted coaches to PSVAR standard, early adopters of that, and not only is it phenomenally expensive, you're looking at 25-30 grand a vehicle, you lose your vehicle for several months, and the lift comes out once a day when the driver checks it, and that's pretty much the only use it can get. So it's very hard for us to make a business case, setting aside compliance, for doing that. So you've got to be careful around blanket compliance with accessibility needs if you just look at the compliance aspect of it. And sometimes I think the size of the solution needs to be proportionate to the size of the problem that you're dealing with. It's easy to say, well, everything should just be compliant with everything. That does create difficulties, particularly for the SMEs. So that's our experience.
Great, thank you all. We're going to offer an opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions of the panel as well, but I just want to start off with a couple of things myself. One is a question that I think almost any of you could answer, and welcome contributions from more than one. But if there was one thing that you could do to improve accessibility in terms of the way vehicles are designed now, what would it be? And I guess one of the things I'm really interested in, Chris, is you talked about contrasts, etc. Are there things that operators do that are particularly wrong? I've heard about some, dark colouring that can be perceived as a whole by some people that makes it really difficult for them. So, what one thing in terms of vehicle design would you change?
Limiting it to one is quite difficult. I think we'd benefit from greater collaboration from suppliers and creating a picture together, because I think sometimes elements are selected in isolation. So you'll select your seat moquette based on what your livery's always been, and that could be quite jarring against what your floor is or anything like that. And I think we always use this kind of analogy when we're talking about this, about the electric toothbrush. It was a great piece of design. It's not how it looks, it's how it works. And it was developed to meet a specific challenge, but now most people in the audience will have one of those because it benefited everybody. And I think as we look to try and onboard more passengers, if we make these spaces considered, designed with consideration to everybody, you can actually make them more appealing and get repeat business and get passengers on there and make it. There's such a huge amount of people who are impacted with, say, autism. If you're getting on a bus and you've got a really busy seat fabric, that's going to have an effect on your cognitive battery. And by the time you get to where you need to go, you could be almost depleted of energy. So you can't do a day's work until you've had 2 hours or so to just rest in a quiet place to actually recharge. And then you spend the rest of the day thinking, I've got to go through that again to go home. So it's just, I think the one thing I change is awareness, making people more aware of the needs of these passengers.
And how do we do that then? So we have teams of people at large operators specify the most vehicles. Do we think those who are procuring those vehicles really understand all of those issues, or how do we move things on? Obviously, if I'm buying a bus and it's going to have Altro flooring in it, I guess your team can feed into that and say, well, I wouldn't do it that way, and give advice. But I guess the same has to apply around seat moquette and the panels, etc. Is there any advice as to how we move that on?
I think it's really, something like this. The starting point is having the discussion and raising awareness to this, because it's through no fault of anybody else. It's because we've not been thinking about it, and it's only until you actually start to look at the numbers. And imagine at least half of the audience would have some relation to someone who's got dementia or is neurodivergent, and when you start to have the conversation, everybody thinks actually, that is true. The more we talk about it and the more we consider it, the more the industry will learn. And I think we do. We host something called the Design Forum. We try to bring operators, OEMs, designers, passengers, everyone together to do these sort of things, to have these discussions and work together. And I think it's a collaborative effort from the industry to achieve the next goal.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I just add to that to that question? Because I think there's a big conflict going on, which some bus manufacturers are starting to get a grip of. But we don't currently have 2 wheelchair spaces. We have 1, and we have chosen to do that, based on the fact that if you put a second wheelchair space in on some buses, you end up with 4 accessible seats downstairs. We were in a place much better than this 10 years ago, where we had lots of accessible seats without steps up, down on the lower deck. So I think one of the main things that needs to change is a flat floor first lower deck, so that we have 12, 14 seats accessible without steps and have 2 wheelchair spaces, because there is this conflict going on at the moment whereby people who are less able but not disabled are finding it very difficult to get onto buses because there are fewer and fewer accessible seats.
Okay, great, thank you. And the other question I had was what role does technology play in enhancing the accessibility of public transport for neurodiverse individuals in particular?
I think it's one of those aspects that we touched upon. If something's designed well, it benefits everybody. And so people with autism are quite often very, I think 50% of people with autism have some degree of anxiety disorder with it. So knowing where the bus is, on that journey from as Barclay said, from the bus stop onwards, you're relying on that routine and information. So apps or onboard displays to show where the next stop is, and communicating. Some people might not be comfortable to communicate with the driver, so being able to have facilities that enable people to communicate through a different means, or not communicate at all, to get where they need to go. It's hugely important.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. Certainly with apps where you can track the vehicle, gives you real assurance, because sometimes if you've got real information at a stop, sometimes it's just showing scheduled times and the time passes and you're thinking, well, do I wait or do I risk going home and having the bus pass me? But that assurance that you can see, right, it's been caught up in congestion, I can see it's about 3 minutes away, so it's worth waiting for it. Gives you that reassurance that the bus will be there.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I'd like to open it up, and Dave is kindly armed with a, he's armed with a microphone and is kindly going to facilitate the Q&A.
I will do, but first of all, just one thing that occurs to me having listened to this presentation is sometimes when new legislation comes in, it can seem like, oh God, it's just something else we have to do. But what seems to be coming across is this is an opportunity to improve your business, to attract new visitors, new users. And I just wanted to put a question to you on behalf of the CPT. What's the CPT been doing to help operators to get to grips with the various challenges? And what are you doing in the future about it?
I think if we go back to the challenge that we had with PSVAR, there were a lot of our members who realised that they weren't compliant. So we worked with government to come up with a pragmatic solution to improve accessibility, but to give people some breathing space in terms of exemptions. And with accessible information then, I think some of the exemptions, again, they were pragmatic. They didn't disadvantage people by having them, but equally they made it easier for operators to comply. So it was more about achieving balance, I think, in the industry. But going more widely than that, I think with the latest big change, accessible information, we did an awful lot of work to raise awareness of what operators had to do and explain to them some of the detail, because a lot of this is quite complex. I tried to simplify it in some of my slides, but there are complex requirements that depend on various factors, and we see it as our job to support our members to understand what they actually really need to do by when.
And you'll continue with that, I'm sure. Yeah. I saw a hand come up here. Yes, sir. I'll come up to you over here.
Thank you. I'm Adam Sargent from the Neurodiversity in Transport Centre of Excellence. One of the biggest things that you can do to help an autistic passenger is to, within an app, have live passenger occupancy within a vehicle on a route. But one of the challenges with that is commercial sensitivity and competition threats. What can be done to provide live occupancy, so like 20 seats being available, without the commercial sensitivity, because when it comes to things like this, if the first bus is crowded, the autistic passenger might be better off waiting for the one 5 minutes behind, which is almost empty. Thank you.
Good question, Adam. Thank you. Yeah, who wants to take that one?
So, sorry.
Yeah, go on. You go.
I was just going to say, it's really sad, isn't it, that it's viewed as anti-competitive to help customers. That's from head of customer experience speaking there. It is really sad. I think one of the challenges we've had in this space, because we've tried 3 times with this. Okay, we've tried using CCTV cameras, we've tried using seat sensors, and we've tried some various other things as well. We haven't yet got a way of doing this door counting. That was the other one, people coming on and off, but it can't clock people who are short, or So we've tried to do this because I can absolutely see the benefit of this. We are working at the moment with a company called Moonbility, actually, at National Express, as to how we can feed that information through from a point of view of the disabled space being occupied. So we are looking to move down this path, but the technology doesn't quite seem accurate enough yet. And obviously you can do it with AI, and Google do it with Rail. They predict when things are going to be busy and not. But that's not always as accurate as we would like it. So fully on board. I think as we move towards franchising, that commercial sensitivity is going to drop away, and in some respects it already is, and we need to really challenge that as a business, at National Express, and say, we're here for the customer, what we need to be able to provide this sort of thing. But there are challenges in the technology to give it.
But hopefully it will get there eventually. Okay, I think this lady wants to say something.
Hi, so 2 things. I'm Kirsten from Transport for the North. Legislation, it's potentially going to be coming again, some new ones setting out the things, and obviously, with the decarbonisation of buses, there's a lot of people who are already getting new bus fleets that may not meet the new legislation that comes out. How high a risk do you think that is? And then do you think there should be some legislation to set these standards for bus stops and the infrastructure supporting buses? Thanks.
Who'd like to take that one?
I mean, I'd be happy to say around bus stops. Barclay spoke earlier about the accessibility of some bus stops. We have expressed frustration and had a lot of conversations with the Department for Transport about the dichotomy of operators spending millions of pounds making their fleets accessible, only to operate to bus stops that aren't accessible, and in some cases are accessible, but where the road space around them isn't managed properly, so that buses aren't able to access them in order to get wheelchairs and other people who have disabilities on and off vehicles. So that's something that we made very clear in our response to the call for evidence, and we'll continue to make that point. And I think it's difficult because there's a massive infrastructure problem out there, and it's not easy to resolve. But in the way that PSVAR gave our industry time, starting in 2000, looking forward to make changes progressively, I think we should try and do the same around the infrastructure.
I think, did you want to come in, Roland?
Yeah. Just to follow on that, I think the industry has come a long way. Our industry has, including the SME sector, and it has been an expensive process. I share the frustrations around the roadside infrastructure, and I do think it depends on who's responsible for that infrastructure, which can vary by area. One borough council I deal with, the guy responsible says, we'd love to do something. I've got a budget of £4,000 for the year for bus stops, and I spend that on broken glass. And that's a shame. And we'd love to see better infrastructure out there, but realistically, it's down to local authority, borough and district council budgets, I think, and that's out of our hands.
I think there's possibly a way of, if we continue to improve real-time information, the need for perfect infrastructure, I wouldn't say becomes less and less, but if you can rely on information that your bus will be there in 3 minutes' time, you can give yourself 2 minutes to get to the bus stop. You're dwelling for 1 minute. So the better we get with real-time information and the accuracy improves, I think that will help. Won't solve things, but it will certainly help with the bus stop piece. I get incredibly frustrated, as you probably do with bus stops. You know, it seems to fall into pockets of investment. You know, if certain areas had a bit of investment, even on a road, you'll see perfect bus stops, and then suddenly it'll then be just a flag with open elements because that's where the funding stopped. So it's hugely frustrating. But I think as technology improves, and if people have access to the technology, then I think we can actually reduce the time people spend at bus stops anyway.
But I think, Barclay, one of the points you were making was that it's about the physical existence of the bus stop. For somebody who is maybe partially sighted or has some problem and can't actually find the bus stop because it's not obvious the bus stop's there. It's that sort, rather than a technology or anything else.
Absolutely, and uneven ground or lack of paving, you haven't got a safe walking route to the bus stop. With an autistic user who lives in a remote area with minimal transport links, and they were talking about the absence of information at bus stops exacerbates their anxiety. Going back to what you said, if the real-time information was more accurate, that would help. I have a bus stop near me which is outside a little supermarket. It's got a raised curb, great, but the way the shelter has been positioned, you can't actually get a wheelchair. User can't actually get in between the shelter to access the vehicle. So there needs to be more common sense when these bus stops are constructed. There needs to be meaningful engagement with disabled people in the planning and design of shelters and bus stops, and a zero tolerance approach to anything that restricts access, people parking on bus stops, pavement clutter, etc.
Okay. Anybody else out in the audience got anything that they would like to ask at this stage? Yes, I'll come to you.
We have a question here on what you think the solutions could be, or what kind of support could be provided for SMEs in terms of blanket compliance. And we can supplement it if you don't.
One at a time. We'll do one at a time if you don't mind. Oh, it's the same question. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, just to supplement it, I thought what Roland was saying about how difficult SMEs could find it when there is blanket compliance, and how it's like, one day we could say that you need to be doing this, but because you've expressed that, if you do then buy old buses that are that have to be retrofitted, and that's quite expensive. Not saying that you have to have a solution for that, but what could be the solution? Who do you think could support with that? And obviously, there's been a lot of great ideas going on about, we could do this and we could do that. But when you think about it for SMEs, can you? Because you look kind of scared there when they were like, we could do this and we need to look at this and we change the buses this way. So it's like, what's your thoughts on it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, basically, how practical is it for SMEs? I think is the point they're doing. What support is there for them?
Support. I mean, it comes down to money, unfortunately, and nobody tends to want to pay us any more for a fully accessible vehicle, unfortunately. But there have been pots of money from government, but they dry up and they're oversubscribed. We can do things, but we have to be very careful around our investment planning, our capital expenditure and things like that. Even for, $5,000 for a accessible information system, I've got 25 buses to roll that out on, and that adds up to a lot of money. And unlike government departments, unlike the big companies, it's my business, and I'm responsible for those investment decisions, and if I get it wrong, it goes badly wrong, and I'm on the hook for that. So it does really want carefully thinking about, we can do some longer term stuff with time and planning, but I think the pragmatic approach and some of the partial exemptions where we can do as much as we reasonably can, I think is a good way to go, and that's why I like engaging with CPT. I'm very much for what is reasonable adjustment to cater for people with different conditions. You can go blanket compliance, but that's going to be very difficult. So what can be done, and things like, staggering the rollout with appropriate timescales and government funding to ease the pain is gets us along the way to where we need to be, even if we just can't jump to that, brand new vehicle on a route that.
So I think what
what
you're saying is basically you want to comply, but as much as you can comply. You're not kind of dodge anything, but to be reasonable about the scale on which you can comply compared to the big boys in the industry.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, Keith, I think we've just about run out of time for this, so I'm sure you would like to thank the panel for their input into this. Thank you for chairing it, and thank you all for attending. Our next session will be at 12:15. We're going to be looking at coach tours, so do hopefully join us then. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.